Welcome to the Strong Ambition podcast. This is officially the second season. We've done over a year of episodes, and because of that, I have a very special guest, my very first guest coming on again, Raymond Vincent Lavoie, my best friend, and he is an expert in the realm of flow. So when we talk about ambitious living, this is a very key fundamental part of it. If you haven't seen or heard the first episode of Flow, please go back to the very first episode because it is to date the most listened to episode because it's fascinating stuff. It's extremely leading edge research on what makes people flow and enjoy life. And some people might understand this in terms of sport, when you're just feeling you have a great game, everything's clicking, but there's also realms of this when it comes to your work and things that you're trying to accomplish. And we talk a lot about how we can experience flow better within training. And so this is a great podcast because I honestly even told Ray after we were off air, I said, you actually taught me a lot right there. And so there's some very tangible things here for you to learn from. And so without further ado, here is my guest, Raymond Lavoie. Good morning, Razor. Welcome back to the podcast. How are you today, sir?
Doing great. Nice to be back. I wasn't sure if you're going to let me back on, so it's nice to be here.
Well, actually, so not only were you, and this is why I made it specific, I told you that you were the first person ever on the show, and this is the start of the second season, and to date, you are the most listened to podcast. So let's hopefully double that up this year, and let's see if we can hit even more numbers. So yeah, why don't you tell me what's going on? How's the research and the flow going?
Incredible right now. I'm still buzzing from last night. Actually just published a paper last night, which feels so good. The paper was under review for 3 years at the journal. So when it finally goes through, there's such a rush of different emotions, pride and relief, more than anything with this one, because like 3 years is a long time to be under review at a journal.
Yeah. And you really completely humbled me on how difficult science research is and just the levels of quality research. I don't think people have any comprehension to how challenging that process is. So when something is published, and especially in a substantial paper, they just don't realize what that peer editing review really does. So why don't you tell people a little bit about that as much as you can?
Yeah, there's a lot that goes into it. And you're right. One big thing is the quality of the journals. Like there's a bunch of crap journals. There's a million journals you could send your work to. So there's a ranking system that we have going from, A star, which is actually what that one last night was. So that's as high as it gets. And then down to C. And so you can rifle papers off to those C level journals and they'll get accepted right away. Sometimes they don't really go under review. They'll take a quick peek. They're trash, right? So the work that gets done there is really low quality and, nobody really sees it. But if you're going to those higher end journals, it's nasty. And so they basically try to find as many holes as they can in the research. So a lot of it has to do with the design of your studies and if there's, anything else that could explain what's going on. So they basically just slam it as hard as they can. And it's kind of a crapshoot because you don't know who you're going to get as reviewers, right? It totally depends who you get. So the peer review, there's a lot of good things about that system. It's kind of, all we really have. There's a few journals that are more open access. You submit your stuff. So getting around that, but with peer review, essentially, you got to convince the people that are reviewers, the 2 or 3 people on the paper. And so, sometimes you could get someone that goes, oh, this work is so cool. This is so impactful. I love it. And then you get somebody else saying, this is shit. This is no good. And so you get totally different opinions sometimes. So, sometimes it's a matter of luck and getting people that are on board. And there's a lot of things that we do strategically when we write to try to get certain reviewers. So you'll reference certain people's work early on in the paper and to try to encourage getting, certain people. So there's things that you can do to try to put things in your favor in the review process, but a lot of times it's just, you gotta get lucky that there's no one that's a reviewer that's just deciding to be a dick. And this one that we just published, there was one person that was just being an absolute stickler on a couple things. And so it went like, over 4 rounds of review because of them. The other reviewers were like, oh yeah, this looks good, I'm totally happy with it. But there was one person just really being really sticky on a couple things. So the way it works is, like, you submit your paper, you put in a couple years of work into that, right? You got to design multiple studies, and then you got to write up the paper. So that process takes a couple years. Then you submit it and you go, man, this paper's so good, I love it. They're gonna love it. and then 90 whatever percent of the time it gets rejected before it even goes under review, right? So they go, we don't like it, this isn't gonna work at our journal. So the majority of cases don't even get under review. Then the select few that get under review, after the first round, they go, there's a lot of holes in this. We don't really see a path to publishing, so it gets rejected after the first round. But, in those very few instances, it gets past the first round, they go, yeah, we like the idea, but there's a bunch of stuff you got to change, right? We don't really believe this. We want you to collect more data because we're kind of concerned about, this part of it. So it's an iterative process there where you submit it. If they like it, they'll give you some changes to make. You do your best to make those changes and submit it back to them. Not only the paper itself, but you end up having this huge document where you address every single one of their comments. So that document alone will end up being like 15, 20 plus pages. Just trying to be like, oh, great point, you're brilliant kind of thing. So it's really a matter of almost pumping their tires and making them feel good as reviewers. But that's a huge document. So you do that every single time and you keep going round after round. This one, went over 4 rounds. So it's a long drawn out process. And a lot of times, like, the reviewers on this one did make it a lot better. So you get experts, in your area, and they go, hey, did you think about it this way? Or, here's a crack or a hole in it. And so through the review process, it ends up being a lot better. It's just a rigorous process when you're at those top journals.
Yeah, it was really humbling when you had told me this, because I know you worked so hard to even get your very first one published. And like you had just said, getting this last one, it's just such a sigh of relief. It really is, like, in some way a trophy and a title for you. The thing I'm curious about, do you feel that, like, I know for sure some papers just have to be like, this is the whole idea of the peer review editing, but when you think about other subjects, or do you think possibly yours is a bit more unique? Because when you talk about flow, it is, it's hard to quantify, right? So do you think that's a part of why you've had so many challenges in creating this?
Big time. So a couple points in there that I'll hit on. The first one is, other areas, more hard sciences. It's very easy. Well, I shouldn't say it's very easy, but the process for them is easier in that, you got data, you got these facts, the support, you present it. Our area is more like storytelling, right? So, a lot of ours is, why is flow important? And why is this issue important for people to understand? So you kind of got to sell your story just as much as, the data's got to be high quality and cohesive. So there's an added challenge there in our area, in that it's about, telling a cool story with the data. But for sure, you're right. Flow, since it's something that, people have an idea of, but don't really know that well, sometimes we'll have reviewers just saying, oh, well, isn't flow just like positive affect, like positive emotion? And you go, oh no, because there's not enough people that know flow very well to be great reviewers on it. And that's kind of going back to the review process that we were talking about before. You get these people that are supposed to be subject area experts. And related to flow, it's kind of tricky to find that because not a lot of people study it. So then, I talked about getting lucky with the mix of reviewers. Typically when we submit these papers on flow, there'll be some people that know about it, and those are the people going, sweet idea, like this really pushes the literature, we love it. And then you get someone that just doesn't know flow but feels like they do, and they go, yeah, this is just positive affect, isn't it? And then the crappy thing about that, though, is that whatever concerns they have, you got to address it, right? So you rebuttal in your review and you go, well, no, I mean, some of our research is showing this, it's not a concern. But if they are sticky on that, you have to run more studies just to calm their concerns. So it gets really, really tricky with flow just because people don't quite understand what it is, but they have strong opinions on what they think it is. And so you end up wasting a lot of time, trying to make one reviewer happy. So there's a lot of challenges there. And I kind of knew that going in, right? People warned me, they go, this is, it's going to be a really challenging topic to study for that reason at the review process. And now most of the hard work is done though. And that's kind of strategically what I've been doing in my papers is figuring out what these reviewers are saying and getting caught up on, and then writing papers to address those so I can reference them. So the first, main flow paper that I published was pulling it into marketing context, right? And talking about these micro flow experiences, these shorter flow experiences that you'd have in your day-to-day life. Because most reviewers would equate flow with that, just climbing a mountain kind of thing, these really extreme events, which is, how it was talked about in a lot of books early. So kind of had to change people's perception of, what would be a flow state versus not. So there's been a lot of work that I didn't expect having to do in kind of laying out little pieces. And it mostly came from the review process where it's like, damn, people they keep getting hung up on X. So we got to write a paper now to address that. So, man, it's been crazy, the past, 5 years doing this stuff and having to add those pieces for the reason that you mentioned. But now the foundation is laid out, right? We got those pieces that help explain what flow is and how to measure it, like the scale that we published. And now we're able to start, building on that. And people are starting to understand, what exactly it is. So tons of work going in, but the hard work's done now and we're able to move forward and build off of that.
I love how you kind of strategically did that, but it kind of built up this path for you now, having to address these issues. One of the things I remember I was talking about a long time ago was when you talk to some academics, because they're just not as emotional. They didn't play sports. And when you talk to someone in sports about flow, they get it. But there are so many people you talk to and you see the word flow, it's like, what is that? And so you are literally on leading research, that there's only, I always get his name wrong, but he's
tough name.
I looked at it today and I still
ridiculous. Yeah.
But yeah, and so his, kind of broad description. And so other than that, it's brand new research. So that's why, like you had said, you're going into kind of a forefront of a little bit of like psychology here. And it's a very important thing that you have to distinguish this from just feeling good, right?
Yeah.
So if you were to try to break it down, because some people might not have seen your last episode, what could you break down roughly about what flow is? And then let's kind of talk about what flow isn't, because I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, I agree. So I think the best way to think about it is, from an attention perspective. So if you think about flow as this drawn out state of full attention, then it makes a lot of sense to people, right? So, that helps distinguish it from just feeling good and positive emotions. It's when you're fully absorbed, you're concentrating on something for an extended period of time. Right. And so when you think about it that way, then you're able to tease it apart. So that's how I would describe it.
Well, and that's a really simple way to do it. I think that makes sense, the attention level. So how could someone know if they like, because we have broken it down where you got to realize you kind of go in and out of flow throughout your day in life. But then how do you know whether or not it's not flow?
Right. So the scale that we publish would, help you determine this, but there's degrees to it. And this is something that comes up with reviewers a lot too. People will think you're either, in flow or not. And, at a certain point, you personally, subjectively would say whether you experience flow in something or not. And it's largely based on that perception that you were totally immersed in what you're doing. You lost track of time. You lost track of your sense of self. Those would be the best markers for you to say, yeah, I was in flow. But it's on you, subjective. I do argue that there's ranges of this, right? Right. You could ask someone how happy they are, right? And so they'd score on a certain measure. You could also ask someone, are you happy? Right? Yes or no. And so that's, subjective on your end. So there would be some score on a range for how happy you think you are. And you would be able to say, yeah, I'm happy versus not. But for you, it's going to show up differently on that range. And it seems like flow. So there's a couple different ways to measure flow. We came up with that scale, which means that, you'd rate yourself on these 6 items we came up with from 1 to 7. But there's also a measure where it's more of a yes, no, right? And those experiences I just described would be how you do that, right? So you had to feel like, that was the only thing on your mind, like you totally lost track of everything else going on around you. And if that was the case, then you'd say you experience flow. So what we did in some studies is we included both measures, right? So if you ask people that one, did you experience flow, yes or no? And then you also ask them the scale items, you'd have an idea as to where that threshold is, right? If you look at the group of people that said they experienced flow and you compare that with the group of people that said they didn't, you look at the averages of each. And it seems like, the people that are saying they experience flow score about 5 out of 7 on that scale. So of course, it's going to range, person to person, but on average, it seems like people are scoring about 5 on that scale. So that's how you could tell. The other aspect of flow that we're teasing out is the fluency part of it, right? Things need to be going well. That seems to be what confuses people, right? So it's when you're immersed in something for an extended period of time, and it seems it's going very well for you. And they're related, right? If things aren't going well, right? Like let's say you're, in a sport, you're playing a sport and you make a mistake or something, your attention might start dwelling on that mistake, right? It'll pull you out of the moment because you're thinking, about the mistake and what people think of you maybe. So that would pull you out of the experience. You're not absorbed in the experience anymore because your attention goes from, the moment and the performance to your thoughts. And so that's why I think thinking about flow from an attention perspective makes a bunch of sense. And, people can understand it better that way.
Yeah, I really, I love how you're fleshing out all these things because it is so untangible at first. But even when you started to talk about fluency to me the first time, I'm like, oh, there is something there. it's this synchronization between attention, focus, and getting things right in a very fluent manner. And so I really appreciated that dimension that you threw at me when you were talking about it. And just the whole concept that you have discovered a scale, because I said whether or not you're in flow, and that I already should have noted, you can't, it's always a gradient. Like life is on a gradient. The only thing that's absolute is when you're dead. And even then they can bring you back to life. So you're not totally dead. So everything is on, you know what I mean? Like everything in life has a level of scale. It's on a continuum. And so that's why I do really like this concept of grading it and understanding it to what degrees. And so when you see this, what are some other aspects that people should even appreciate it to really ask? And the reason why I was asking this is because you started talking about happiness, and I think that's a very interesting depiction to create more emotional attachment to something, right? To encourage the attention, to encourage this challenge. But what if they don't actually perceive any happiness, but they get into possibly a rhythm and flow and challenge? Some people might have work and jobs and tasks that they just have a flow state in, but they don't necessarily have any degree of flow. Would you still qualify that?
Okay, so what I think you're talking about is like the role of emotion, essentially, and what that plays in flow, and it's kind of a dangerous game. And so there's different forms of attention, and if a task elicits, positive emotions, or any emotions for that matter, it's going to demand attention. And if it's positive emotions, that attention would be fluent. Right? You're playing a sport that you love, you're watching a show that you love, something that elicits a lot of positive emotions. It sort of feels effortless to pay attention to it, right? As opposed to something you're not a huge fan of, some work that you don't like, it feels effortful, right? You feel exhausted at the end. And so emotion is kind of this sort of hack to get the full attention that's also effortless. Because if you think of flow as those two components that we conceptualized it as recently, absorption, sustained full attention, and everything's going fluently, emotion can do that for you, right? And so if you construe a task in a way that it makes you feel really good, and I know we've talked about this, personally before, the importance of identity, and identifying with certain tasks and activities, then it means something to you personally, right? So there's emotional attachment to that. So interacting with that, engaging in that task, it holds your attention fully and effortlessly, fluently. So emotion is kind of, I hate using the term hack, because everyone thinks, how do you hack flow? And flow is a lot of work. There's a lot of things, skills involved and work that goes in beforehand. But emotion is one way to get you there. But there's two sides to that, right? If you get too emotional, if your emotions kind of take over during sport, then it can really be a detriment to flow and disrupt everything. But if you can harness the positive affect, right, and enjoyment of the task, that helps a lot. And so maybe that's a good lead into the paper that we just published. So what we were trying to do there is figure out how to get people in flow in a marketing context. And so we were looking at product trials. So it actually builds off of this notion because we used curiosity to do it. So, okay, coming up with a new product, you want people to experience it, you want them to really like it. We were looking at music, and to get people to actually download the music. And so we said, okay, if we can get people curious beforehand, it should encourage them to experience flow during the trial of the product. And then in turn, they'd like it more and be more likely to download it. And that was the case. That worked very well. But if you think about it from that positive affect perspective, curiosity is a state where you have a lot of inherent interest in what's going to happen, right? And it's a state of arousal, right? You need to know, right? When you're curious, you go, I got to know what's going to happen here. And then the process of getting that information and learning, whatever it is very rewarding, right? And it feels really good and it's fluent, it's enjoyable. So curiosity is one way to sort of make that happen. In the paper, we manipulated it based on the amount of information that you gave, right? So curiosity working in this inverted U, where you give people a little bit of information, it teases the curiosity, starts to grow, and then it hits this inflection point at the top where, okay, I got enough information, this is overload, and it actually has a negative effect. So we'd have conditions where people got like no information, a little bit of information, and too much. And the people that got, just a little bit of information were more likely to experience flow, when actually listening to the song, which is freaking cool to me, that you can just manipulate how many sentences of information or, a preview of the song, and it helps them get into flow. That's freaking cool. And worked. We also showed that certain people were more curious. In particular, in this context, it was people that were more open to experience, as a personality trait. They were more inherently curious beforehand, more likely to experience flow during the trial, ended up, more likely to download it in the end. So that was really cool. But that's the tie to the, emotional tag to this, right? Like, how enjoyable is this? Is there enough pause emotion related to the context itself and the process of that task or activity? So curiosity is one example of how you can do that.
Yeah, really, I love how you're breaking it down. Whenever you talk about emotions, it's super challenging in scientific literature, right? Because it's all subjective and it's hard to scale these things. But that's a fascinating paper. I really love how you did that, and you transferred it to marketing. It's got me curious. I want to know how much I got to actually, how many words I'm supposed to be using on my marketing. But no, I think that's really cool. And the one thing I really find interesting is like, some more tangible things, but I know you come from a business background, right? So a lot of the stuff that you end up getting funding for and stuff like that comes from more of the business end of things, because you want your, people to sell and to be in this state of mini flow. You're going to sell better. Have you looked into or started to work towards some of the things in the realm of sports and in that kind of realm, where it's less about the business, but trying to discover how athletes can understand this in their sport?
Yeah, so I'm staying away from there research-wise. It's not smart to kind of dive too much into other areas. You want to get established. For me, get established as a flow researcher, then, sprinkle it into the marketing literature more, which is what I'm working on now. But down the road, that's something that I want to do because that's where this stuff kind of started for me, right? It's like, experience flow, whether it's, hitting the bag in boxing or, golfing or hockey. And you go like, oh my God, what was that? Right? Man, did that feel good? And it's rare though, right? And that's kind of the reason why I'm doing this stuff is like, let's figure out the keys to this and help people experience it. And so I do think about the sports application a lot, and I have a lot of ideas there. But on purpose, you only got so much time, right? So I have to focus my attention on my particular area. So down the road, I look forward to working with athletes and applying flow in that realm, because I think there's a ton of value there. But I haven't done it yet. And so, even just our curiosity element there, you could apply that to work it out, right? If you approach a workout with, a mindset of, what could I do today, right? What could my personal best be today? And as you're going along, you're it would help you focus. And there's kind of that thing towards the end of it that you could reach. So it helps you immerse yourself sort of in the moment in that workout and achieve flow. So a lot of the stuff that we're doing is, in the context of marketing, but the same principles apply, right? It's psychology, right? So, curiosity influences your ability to pay attention in the moment and how fluent it is when you get that information. That could be applied to working out, could be applied anywhere, right? So that's the beauty of this stuff, is a lot of it is just, what's the context of the actual experiments, the studies you're running. The other thing is, again, if you think about flow as, based on sustained full attention, right? You're locked in. I think this is maybe a good chance to bring up what flow isn't, and why flow doesn't happen often. Because, think of your traditional experience, right? If you really sunk yourself into the moment there, a lot of times you could be paying attention to things that are going on, other people in the gym, other things that are going on, what you're going to do later that day, maybe something negative that happened to you earlier that day, right? So your attention drifts to the future, to the past, to things in the current moment that are not relevant to what you're doing. So that is the problem, right? There's so many things pulling our attention in other directions, especially now. I know with myself, when you try to do a lot of work, you end up taking on too much. And then your mind's kind of worried and thinking about all these things that you have to do, what you're doing next. So when you pull that into the context of working out, part of being able to experience flow, and this is what I was talking about before related to it being work, is being able to regulate your attention. Right? You have to be able to do that, right? If you're someone that can't narrow your attention, you're easily distracted by things in your environment, you're not going to be able to experience flow. Because by definition, flow means you're paying full attention to this task for an extended period of time. So if you're a person like, what was that? Any little movement, you're screwed, you're toast, because you're not going to be able to experience flow. Also related to that, right? Things in your life got to be in place, right? Because if you have a lot of things bothering you, maybe it's emotions in your life, you're not going to be able to focus on the moment, right? So to the degree that there's things in your life that are bothering you and, on your mind, you're not going to be able to experience flow, right? So I guess to summarize all of that, you could think of your attention either being, on the task or in your own head, right? And if you're paying attention to irrelevant thoughts and emotions, whether it's in the future, the past, you're not in flow, right? So you got to take care of the things around you, some of those lower level needs, to be able to experience flow. Because, if those are on your mind, you're not going to be able to experience it. So you have to take care of everything else that's going on in your life. And you also need to understand how to regulate your emotions, right? We talked about emotions can be your friend related to flow. That's a great way to get into it. But on the flip side, you got to be able to manage the negative ones that would pull you out of it. If you're thinking about you're in a sport, whatever, things go wrong, right? Things don't go your way. How long you sort of dwell on that and how much that influences you would dictate flow. Because something could go wrong. You're playing hockey, you screw up. I screw up all the time. Throw a muffin up the middle and somebody intercepts it. If you dwell on that and that really bothers you, you're going to be toast for the rest of the game. But if you're strong mentally, if you can regulate your attention, bring it back to the moment, and kind of get rid of those negative emotions and move forward, you could experience flow shortly after that, right? So those are the skills in being able to allow yourself to focus on the task at hand for an extended period of time. So those are the tools. And people say, oh, how can I hack flow? How can I experience flow right away? Hell no, man. You got these things happen, right? There's two sides to this. The context could be one that demands your attention, right? And things could just be falling into place for you really well. So flow could happen randomly to you, based on the context and what happens. But a lot of it is the work that you put in, right, beforehand. So you got to develop those skills too.
Yeah, well stated. And the main thing there that I just can't let go of, and I'm definitely going to apply to myself, is the curiosity factor. You mentioned going into a workout, and a lot of people are new to workout.
Yeah,
they're not curious about it. They're there because they're putting in work, and I've even had a conversation. People are like, I can suffer through a workout. Like, that's not the intention of working out. That's not
the opposite, right?
no, you're there to try to improve your movements and curious. Can I move better, right? And can you challenge yourself to do more? Because whether you're trying to gain size or lose body fat, it's a slow process. So you have to be. I love the term curious, and that even makes me really think about sport too. It's like, what can I do in the moment? Like trying to have that right level of intention with the moment. And me as being a goalie, I played last night, and I'm just using all these examples that you described quite well, because there is such an important level of focus without excessive arousal. And that is such a challenging thing to find. And, even for people in real life, for their jobs and tasks, whenever you want that fluency and the attention, I love how you said it's the work that you put in. One of the things that, like, there's no way you could be a goalie without having some skills as a goalie and getting flow, right? You have to have some skills ahead of time. And there's no way with work without setting yourself up in an environment, maybe even understanding your mindset to how to focus attention better, doing some mindset work. I found the one day I actually put my phone on do not disturb. Oh, hey, go figure. I got him flow, and time flew away, and I never looked at my phone once. So definitely setting up the environment is so helpful. Do you actually have any other kind of, I know people are like asking for hacks. I'm not asking for hacks, but what are some other tangible strategies that you think people should pay attention to, and some stuff that you guys have discovered?
Yeah, so you actually hit on something there that I didn't talk about. I was leaning towards skills related to, attention regulation and emotion regulation. You hit on like actual task related skills, right? So like playing hockey, the skills that go into that. And that is what matters the most, right? And this is not my theorizing. This is how flow was originally positioned, right? Is talking about how flow tends to emerge when you're highly skilled and you're in a task that's highly challenging, right? Where you have just enough skills to handle the task and feel comfortable in doing it. So sort of when you push yourself in these situations where you're truly growing as a person in your abilities, that's when flow happens. And let's link that back to curiosity then, right? If you're thinking about coming up with programs, a good part of a workout would be that curiosity element of what can you do today that you didn't do last time, right? Is it a little extra weight? How much can you reach today? How many reps can you do? How many push-ups can you do? And kind of framing it more in that way to see what you can do, what your potential is really exciting, right? And that also ties back to some of the early work on flow, where, and this also answers your question as to what other people can do to get into flow, is setting up the task in the right way. And your job as a trainer, I think, is a big role in this. In the task needs to provide you with immediate and clear feedback, right? That's how you can sense this progress, and that's what makes you feel really good. So, something like the amount of reps, counting the amount of reps or counting the weight shows you that, right? I'm making progress. I'm getting better. I'm growing. So being able to quantify feedback is a great way to do it. And I know the app that you were using there is great in that it tracks that and you see progress, in the moment and over time, which is really important.
Yeah, you really hit on something for me when you're thinking about this curiosity factor, because I have my templates and stuff like that, and I don't chase. It makes me really look at my programs a little bit more nuanced. And I just had feedback yesterday from a client that said, "Oh yeah, I really like this because it was a different challenge. It was like something very different from the old routine." And so that little factor was so important. Like, it's not like it made a substantial difference on her physiology, but her mentality of, wow, this was really tough, this was challenging, this was different, is just something that, makes me really pay attention to. And I'm going to ensure I utilize this strategy. And I think that's something people should consider. When you're doing your training, how can you, like, I have another client who says, I'm going to try to run a half. My wife wants to. And it's his curiosity that's really inherently making him want to try something new. When people want to try something new, or really, I do love this whole concept of what can I do is really leading to, like, this curiosity emotion. And people who are more curious are more likely going to push themselves. So I think that's really cool. I think you're onto something really incredible there. And that has to do with certain types of personalities too, right? Like you had said, openness.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So, I mean, people are going to be inherently, more or less curious, and it depends on the task too. So, a lot of that comes back to identity. Um, so, I guess for yourself, in training someone, if you can find ways to tie it to their identity, to see, will you be able to do something better that matters to them, right? And figure out what that might be, and just those little pieces of information, which is like feedback on their ability, goes a long way, right? I think in that context, the curiosity might be like, what can I do? What sort of having these goals that you could reach, there could be something great around the corner, is really interesting. We have a paper on group flow that's under review, and we're talking about the concept of momentum, right? Psychological momentum. So a decent amount of work that's showing that there's no real momentum, that doesn't actually carry over, but there is subjective momentum, right? So you see these little bits of progress and you over forecast that, right? You go, oh, this is going to be, really successful. So if you put in, little things at the start of a workout that someone's going to be able to crush it, these early successes, people kind of latch on to that, and it gives you all those positive emotions we talked about, where they go, whoa, this is going to be a really good one. So the things that happen early on will influence how you feel and your ability to engage a little bit deeper with it. All the time we do this all the time, right? Like I laugh at myself, the early signs of something, like if it goes well, you go, this is going to go really well, right? You kind of use those, first interactions, the first like pieces of information as a cue for how the whole thing's going to go. So if you can, try to set that up in your favor, right? Try to have some things in there that will give people little wins, make them see real progress early, and then that'll springboard into more, and the chance to experience flow, right? And I'm sure you feel this all the time when you're working out, right? That feeling when you do notice that real progress and you did do something that you didn't do last day. So, reinforcing that, like, you're better today than you were yesterday. What else could you do? You already reached that. So this could go so much further, because people don't really think about it too deep in their mind, but that initial thought is, anything's possible, right? Like, holy smokes. So I think that's important too, is highlighting the mini wins, and the successes early on, in a workout, in a day. But the more you highlight those, the more likely you could springboard that process to having people fully engaged, because they go, this is really cool. This makes me feel really good. And they want to see where they can take it.
I love how you said that, not just a workout, but in a day too. That really gripped me, because I think it's important that people look at that. There's, when you're doing training, it's not just training, it's nutrition too. And you got to look at, like, are those meals synchronizing? Is everything flowing? And you can look at a day on kind of a macro. It's not actually flow, but you could still depict it that way. But when you had said those early wins, it actually just like completely, oh, okay, that's literally why I set up my whole lift the way I do, because I used to always do like mobility and like light workouts, like light pumps, which I kind of do a bit, but I actually dive right into my main lift now with a bunch of mobility on my rest, so I do it safely. But then I hit my PR, right? I hit my heavy weight, and then the rest of the workout is just fun. And so
Love
you
it.
just
Yeah.
completely nailed how my workouts have been flowing, literally. And it's like, I don't even like, I still push the other ones, but I don't care as much, because I'm like, hey, I hit my PR for the day. I could actually walk out of here right now. But it actually does make me very much aware of that part of the experience that I want to get to some of the other individuals that I have. And what I'm really curious about is, you talked about so many of these, parameters, and you're the flow guy, you're getting into this. So one thing I've always found fascinating about you, and it actually took me years to recognize, and I recognized it a few years ago, is that you are immensely great at flow. And I know I've talked to you about it before, where,
That's questionable. Okay, keep going.
well, like, I mean, so for example, and this is how I think I understood it from living with you, is that I would, like, you would be just set up in the living room at the place that we were staying at, and you're just on your computer and you're hammered away. And to me, like, that's too many distractions if anyone even walks by. And I could walk by and I could just say something out loud and you didn't hear me at all. And so I'm curious if you, well, it sounds like you're not aware that you're in flow, but do you have things that you try to utilize to set yourself up to be able to use this in your life?
Yeah. So yeah, to your point, like there's certain things that I don't experience flowing enough. I think, golf would be one of those, for example. It's something I always try to apply my stuff to. But there are certain things, and work is one of those things. You're right. Like I do experience flow in that, but I think a lot of that comes from, choosing stuff that you're truly interested in. Right. So for me, working on my research, I'm actually going to bring curiosity back in here. I'm genuinely curious to see what happens in that stuff. And the research is so interesting to me that I can lock in that, because, some things that I work on, I'm not that into. Right. And unfortunately for a lot of people, a lot of the work that they do, during the day, they don't care about it. It doesn't speak to them. Right. It's like, I got to do this, right? I got these tasks that I got to finish. You're not going to experience flow in that. But if it's something that you truly enjoy, and this is why I always, tell the students to pursue something that they're, really in love with, that they're truly interested in, then that process sort of happens naturally, right? And you end up making progress in that task. There's a lot of stuff too related to sort of goal progress, right? Once you start making a bunch of progress, then it helps you narrow your attention and to finish that up. So, if I'm really cooking, I don't talk to me kind of thing. I'm making really good progress. This is firing me up, and I got to finish this kind of thing. So yeah, I think a lot of that just comes from, choosing stuff that you're interested in, or finding a way to make it interesting, or like be curious about it in some way. But what I truly do is, like you kind of experiment, right, to see, how to structure your day. And right now, there's a lot of factors involved with this, but for me, one of the main things I'm concerned about is being productive research wise. So if I'm not productive research wise, that bothers me for the rest of the day. So I start my day, writing, doing research, get some progress there, kind of build that momentum that we talked about before. That puts my mind and emotions at ease, right? I feel accomplished, feel relaxed, and then that helps me experience flow and everything else that I do. Another thing that I noticed is, we talked about, more fundamental, basic level needs. Like if you're tired, you're not going to experience flow. And so I noticed, depending when I worked out that day, it would kind of throw me for a loop. And I'm finding now, for me personally, if I do research work all morning, work out midday, then I can get back into my work later and be refreshed and feel good. Whereas depending on how I structured it, I would be more tired and almost like needing a nap some days. So it wasn't optimal for me. So, finding the right sequence of events that energizes you and, doesn't tire you out is really important here too. And another thing that I've been doing is trying to do less. Right? You try to do too much, and I noticed myself getting really tired and not really enjoying what I was doing, which was initially difficult for me because, if I'm not working, I feel like I should be working, and it makes you feel guilty and really bad. But I started to realize the benefits for my own mental health and well-being and the quality of my work from taking rests. Like, I used to work right up until bedtime, trying to be optimally efficient. And man, it wasn't good for me. And it was refreshing to find out that when I took, more breaks, I was actually way better at my job, and I felt better when I went back to do it. So again, those are things that allow your, attention to be focused, you replenish your resources, allowing you to get into flow and help you manage your emotions that will allow you to sink into flow as well. So those are things that I've been working on myself lately.
Well, it makes me feel better about how I set my I'm the same way. You got to get those tangible tasks that, like, if those are done, you feel like you're already accomplished. Your workout makes you feel accomplished in the afternoon. I actually read a book, I think, or listened to a book. I don't read well. And it was about setting up the afternoon for creativity tasks, because there is some research to support that you can tend to be more creative in the afternoon. And that also, because of that curiosity of creativity, can actually pull you in quite easily, right? But even that breakup, you say, the same way. But I love all these great strategies that you talked about, and especially to not work too much, because we definitely still, like, it's getting back and forth. I think we're getting better and better understanding of how important sleep is. It's getting to be a louder message. Mental health is something I want to talk about after, but that is becoming more important. And, I still have clients that are just working so much, and I'm like, okay, I'm not your life coach. I am your trainer and nutritionist. But if you keep trying to grind out that much work in a day, you are doing worse and worse to yourself each day. And you got to stop trying to gratify hours, gratify quality of life. And you can do amazing work in a week with fewer hours because it's better work. And then you're literally like, what are you working towards? Are you working towards a life that's eventually going to be easy? Because you're actually just training yourself to make it hard on yourself, in, like, not in a positive way, right? So I think that's super important, and especially the mental health thing, right? But let's lead into that, because you are a part of a wonderful foundation, HLF. Why don't you tell people a little bit about it, and basically what the mental health is in realms with that, with it's helping students, correct?
Yeah, that's the aim, right? So HLF is all about fostering well-being. And actually, a lot of the stuff that we just talked about are sort of the skills that our programming teaches, like being able to regulate your attention and emotion. But the idea behind it is, a lot of these, mental health challenges and the rates increasing are, to us, a matter of education and lack of education, right? So, mental illness would start early with some sort of a mental health challenge, right? So something like the pandemic makes us realize, this can happen to any of us, right? Really challenge, your emotions and how you're feeling. What we think is the problem is that people don't have the basic understanding of, the tools that go into managing your own well-being. Number one, recognizing when something, might be off, transitioning in the wrong direction, and having the tools to then correct that, and, knowing the activities and exercises to manage it. So what we're trying to do is help people have those tools, be aware of what they need to do, and be able to do it. And so we're targeting schools. We've got a series of classes that help teach the fundamentals of this. So, attention regulation, emotion regulation, what is a thought? What is an emotion? Where does it come from? We think those are fundamental tools. And then that's our core course. It's called, Intro to Mental Fitness. And then what we've done is we've taken those core concepts and we've applied them to different areas of people's lives that could lead to some mental health challenges. Things like relationships, social media, right? What are some things that you're going to encounter in your daily life that could challenge your mental health? And we apply all the concepts from the intro course into those so they understand how to manage, their thoughts and their emotions in that context. So we're really pumped about this. We think it's brilliant and it's much needed, and everybody we're talking to agrees. So we're finishing up the courses right now, getting them approved for credit in the curriculum, which would be huge, right? So that schools can say, hey, kind of like physical fitness, here's a mental fitness course that you can take for credits towards your degree. So we're really excited about that. So that's where we're at right now, is creating these courses with the principles to helping you be aware of and manage your mental well-being. So we actually came up with an app too. I should say the Merrimack students came up with an app, and I'm meeting with them next week, a wellness app, right? So a lot of the lessons and activities that we have, in our programming, the app integrates it into your everyday life. So things like gratitude. There's part of the app where you can, talk about what you're grateful for, and it'll remind you of that and populate a gratitude tree to show you all the good things in your life. Throughout your day, it'll put, motivational quotes, positive messages in there, and it's going to be at random times. So it's not, every day you see this message, it'll come hopefully like just at the right time when you need it. So we're really excited about that. We're hoping to release that some point this summer. So we're targeting students to start. That app will be for everybody though. So we're really pumped about that. We think that is the answer, but there's a lot of work that goes into making that sort of information mainstream and helping people, I guess, accept it, because there is that negative stigma around, mental health, and people think if you're working on it, there's something like wrong with you. But we're equating it to physical fitness, where, it's mental fitness. It's something that you should be working on every day, and you should be aware of, and it's not something to be, shamed about, right, or feel bad about. It's something that is important for everybody.
So important. And the language you guys use, I've never heard people use before. Like, you use the term, just mental fitness, and it's just like, oh wait, no, that makes sense. Like, we understand that we have to train our body. Why not train your mind? And you also use the term mental injury, and I really, really valued that one, because people just have to understand that it is an injury that can be healed. But just like any other sports injury, if it's a muscle, you have to actually do some therapy to it. You have to train it, and that's not a crazy concept physically. And I think you're right that there's still a stigma on it, but it's so nice to see that it is starting to dissipate, because we are in the mental health era for sure, where this is the realm of, healthcare that is the most challenging in psychology. There's so many disorders, and we just barely know enough of them to treat them or to manage them. So if we can get on the forefront, with you guys getting on the forefront to preventing this issue, because students are very vulnerable for it. There's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of stress in that lifestyle, and you're going on to being an adult, and that's so valuable for people to treat it that way. Something I've always felt about nutrition and physical fitness, and now I totally agree with mental fitness, is that the skills that I had when I had finished, my kinesiology, or as far as just taking care of yourself for nutrition and food, should be a base level skill that is taught in schools, so that kids don't have to, overthink it. This is why the adults don't know how to feed their kids or to help their kids with things because it wasn't a great curriculum. Gym class was dodgeball, right? And,
Which is sweet, but yeah.
yeah, it was sweet for some people who knew how to throw balls like you did. For people who didn't, this was
Great
actually
time.
just
Yeah, great time.
torture, right? That goes into the mental fitness. But I think that's so amazing. I think that's incredible what you guys are doing. So I'll definitely put some information in the show notes about HLF. I'm really excited to see what you guys do. So I know you got a meeting coming up here. What I want to know before we wrap up is, I want to talk about the most recent ambition. You did send me a paper or anything else that you want to talk about that's in the pipeline for your research that you're really excited about coming up.
Yeah, so the next one coming up would be that group flow paper. That's fascinating. And there's a lot of principles in there that are great beyond the context that we're studying it in, which is, mostly within organizations and, sort of brainstorming, sort of those creative sessions. There's a lot of principles about how to work with others, right, and support their points. There's aspects of yes-anding related to improv comedy, right? So agreeing, accepting an idea and, extending it, building it, and the influence that has on the other person's emotions and, where you can take the interaction from there. But there's also a lot of elements of sort of that openness again, being open to other people's perspectives and kind of hearing them out. And even though it's maybe uncomfortable for you for a little bit, going with a different perspective to go that direction and be sort of vulnerable for a little bit, which, I think has, a lot of implications these days, with people being divided for a number of reasons, understanding how to, support and build off other people's points. So that's the next big one for me. I also have a theoretical paper that I'm going to be pushing out here right away that kind of explains marketing, flow in marketing from the perspective that we talked about here today, where, part of getting in it is, beyond you in the context, and it's got to be able to really enthrall you. But the other part of it is yourself, cleaning up what's going on in here to allow you to engage. So it's kind of this dichotomy of internal and external forces. And then I'm going to be applying that to marketing and how it's relevant, because with the metaverse and VR blowing up here, flow is going to be really important. That's basically just going to be a heaven for flow floating around in the metaverse. So that stuff's going to start blowing up pretty soon, I think too. Oh, one other thing I wanted to mention related to HLF. I mean, this stuff's about this stuff really matters to me a lot. It's about early prevention, early intervention. So I took a mental health first aid course. And what that's about is, recognizing in other people when they might be having these mental health challenges, right? Which happens to everybody. Those are temporary. So it's important to realize that when that's going on with other people as early as possible, and to, be there for them and support them. And that's essentially what we're doing with HLF, but we're taking a step further to help people recognize it themselves. Because with mental health first aid, you got to recognize it in somebody else and kind of have that awkward conversation. Not sure if they want to talk about it. It's very tricky to navigate. But with the HLF stuff, we're thinking that if people know the fundamentals of this, they can recognize that happening for themselves and, intervene early on before it develops into a mental illness. So stopping that process early on. So I just wanted to mention that because I think that's something that's really important. And on the mental health first aid side, for people to be more aware of when those things are happening to people around them, and just taking the, whatever minute or two just to ask them, how they're doing. If you notice changes in behavior, say you notice, you're doing this differently, is everything okay? And a lot of times people aren't going to want to say anything, that's fine, but just doing that could go a long ways for somebody. So just that's something I'm focusing on right now, but as a message for everybody to just sort of, pay attention to those sort of things.
Absolutely. I love that. And no, everything you said there, I'm super excited for your research, but definitely for HLF, I'm blown away as to how much headway you guys have made in the last year and so. And it's I'm really excited to see what you guys are going to do. And I was talking to Trish, who's the founder of it, and we're definitely going to put together some charities this summer. I got some good ideas, so we'll put together some more ways to get people aware of what great things you guys are doing. So why don't you tell the listeners where they can find out more about HLF?
Higherlearningfoundation.com, but we've got a lot of stuff on Instagram. So depending on, what kind of information, how deep you want to look into it. If you're looking for more quick information to get a feel for the brand, Instagram would be good, Higher Learning Foundation. But our website's got more of the story and kind of what I explained today as our mission and stuff like that. So you can check either of them out. A lot of people seem to want to be involved too. There's a lot of ways to volunteer and get involved. We need a lot of help because, we're starting out, so we don't have a ton of resources. So if you do want to get involved, if that's something that's important to you, feel free to shoot me an email or shoot me a note as well, and we can get you involved.
Awesome. Absolutely. No, this is great. Super excited for it, man. And thank you so much for spending your time today. Again, one of the most fascinating people I've had on here, and we're going to keep getting you on here because I know you're going to keep doing great research, and I'm going to keep bringing you on here to talk about HLF and the great things you're doing. So thanks so much for spending your time today, man.
Appreciate you, brother.
Thanks again to Ray Lavoie. That was a great conversation. It truly was a great flow. I felt like we just really got into it. I had some questions I thought about asking. I didn't need to. It was just, I was curious. And that lesson I told Ray off air after, I was like, that actually taught me a lot. And that is something I'm going to apply to myself. And I'm going to apply to all of my clients. And I hope you too as well. I hope you do this in your life. If you're trying to establish a habit and a lifestyle, something that you're not really good at yet, you have to want to be curious of improvement and setting up yourself for that momentum of improvement. So I think there's a ton to learn from. So I really hope you enjoyed as much as I did. Share this podcast with someone else you think might enjoy it. Remember to leave a comment, subscribe, and always remember that it's not about the pursuit of happiness, but it's about the happiness within the pursuit.